You good?
I'm ready.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming out to our March Construction Advisory Committee meeting. Starting off with the typical call to order. Introductions, we all know each other fairly well by now, so I think we may bypass that. And move straight into the approval of the March minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
I'll second.
Motion made, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Not seeing any, the motion to approve the minutes on that stands is unanimous. Moving on to
Who
our
seconded
board,
the minutes, Ryan, please?
Mr. Hume.
Okay, thank you.
We want to go directly into board member update, or do we want to talk about what has come through on the borough attorney and scheduling before we get into that?
You asking me?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the question is, does everybody understand? You don't need to talk about it now. I just want to make sure the question gets raised. And then for my board member comment, the only other thing I want to mention that I don't put in my email is I'm looking for a recommendation from the committee regarding the procurement. Help me out here. The bundle. I can't think of the word.
The RFQ package,
The what?
the request for qualifications package, to kind of finalize up.
Yes. So not the RFQs, but the when you put a bunch of people, approve a bunch of people for a particular service,
Continuing services.
Continuing services.
and then you rank them, and we want to get rid of the ranking, but I need a recommendation from the committee to bring that forward to the board for discussion.
So if I'm reading Ms. Morgan right, there were a couple of things we discussed. One of the comments you guys made as vendors is that you turn the books in, they get scored. Why do you have to do the presentation? Why don't they just put everybody in a random, and then whatever per company is picked out is.
I am not picking you up. Are we?
Scott's talking, I'm sorry, he'll get a little closer.
Yeah, if I'm reading you right, Ms. Morgan, we talked about, the vendors here suggested that they not have to come and do a presentation. That once
Thank you.
once procurement ranks and scores the book, and they pass the sniff test for finance and so on and so forth, and like similar work, that they basically go in a pool. We pull out, for lack of a better term, number out of the hat, and whoever's the first number is number one, number two, number three. And then we dole work out in that respect, saving you guys some time and money for the presentation portion.
Yeah, so I'm looking for just a basic, 2 or 3 sentence. The construction advisory committee has discussed this, and we are recommending to the board that we make this change. And that way I can bring it to the board for discussion, and before we have contracts go out, we can change the process.
Okay, and I think the other item we discussed was the ability of our continuing contract vendors, that if the district were to utilize them for just some precursory, not full-blown design, but precursory schematics and concepts, that they be allowed to also participate in the larger project RFQ when it's advertised.
That is correct. And Scott, assuming that does go forward to the board, then I would want you to address some of the concerns that have been raised about doing that in other places, because I know that's not as clear cut as the first one. But yes, we need a recommendation on that as well.
Correct, and the beauty of that is Debbie Kirchen had done a spreadsheet about 8 months ago where she reached out to other similar sized counties to get their take on that question. So predominantly, most of them said that they didn't see a reason why we wouldn't allow those schematic vendors to provide RFQ submission as well, providing that we gave whatever information they had created would be distributed prior to the RFQ to all potential vendors that wanted that information. So there wouldn't be any unfair advantage.
Right.
So we have a spreadsheet with comments from various counties, so we can attach that and make it part of our board presentation. How would you like to conduct this? With a board briefing to discuss the topic first, and then have it at an action meeting later? Or would you prefer a workshop first and see where that takes us?
Let's do a briefing.
Okay,
Let's not put that in a workshop. Let's do a briefing, make it real tight. You and I can go over it beforehand. But what I really need from the committee is the recommendation itself, so that, we can put it, you can put it on a briefing.
understood.
Okay.
Okay,
And then I have no other board member comments. I'm happy to just listen. I apologize. 3 of us are on the road for professionals about this particular seminar that we're going to, and the others aren't able to cover for me in the meeting today. That's why I'm doing this awkward thing on the phone in case there are questions that people want to ask, of a board member. So
Understood.
I'm happy just to sit by unless there are questions.
All right, thank you very much for that.
Okay.
So it looks like we have 2 action items coming out of this. One was for the design services for continuing services firms not be excluded when the project comes out in proper. And I believe as a committee, we kind of all unanimously agreed to that before. And we had a presentation from the legal department, which was kind of saying you couldn't, but obviously other people are and do. So, I think our recommendation stands, but to formalize it as a recommendation to the board, I believe we would have to formally vote on it as a committee again, if I'm correct there.
That's correct, Ryan.
I propose we make a motion to, on that, to bring forth to the board, to the board, the first one being that the all continuing contracts not have presentations required in the process, the second part not
Yeah.
required.
no, that's what's in there. Now, I would like to say that we only do that for design professionals, and what I mean by that would be architects, engineers. I still think there should be presentations for construction managers.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What do you guys say for continuing
Well,
contracts?
but for continuing contracts, this is based upon a pool of professionals, right?
Well, it's professional, they pass the sniff test with the books that they qualify for the work, and the greatest amount of work could potentially be $4 million, because we just upgraded it.
Right.
So if you think we should apply that to construction management firms, I don't think that's unreasonable anyhow, as long as they pass the bonding and the capability, I think it saves a lot of
I
people
think
time and money.
legally, we can't say one profession versus another profession. I think legally, you have to make it all
Okay,
continuing contracts.
so then we'll do it for all then. Is that what you as a committee would think is most appropriate?
I do.
Okay, I'm
The
getting,
only thing you mentioned,
Getting rid of the actual rankings of the books, and I'm not sure I'm completely on board with that.
well,
me too.
when they put an RFQ out for continuing contracts like they just did, you guys submit a book, correct? With your work, your
That's
company
correct.
values. If you pass the sniff test in your book, meaning insurance capability, similar scope work capabilities for continuing contract program, which I'm sure you all would, then you're all in. So if there's 15, 20 people that submit books and meet those qualifications after procurement goes through, then you're all in the bingo ball cage.
But you have an outlined ranking
The ranking.
from that.
Well, the ranking, what I would suggest to make it where it's transparent is literally, I know this sounds crazy, everyone's company gets put on a piece of paper and put in the ball, you spin the ball, you pick out the piece of
Yeah.
paper, and the first person is ranked number 1, and that goes to the board.
No,
Second,
I think keeping the first process of ranking of the work is all you really need, Dave, from 1 to 10 or 1 to
Yeah, if you're
15
in
or
first
1 to
place, you
5.
earned it, and you get the.
the reason I say that would be very difficult for procurement, because they technically don't have a lot of construction background and knowledge. So to me, the critical things are, 1, do you have the finances and the capability and the staff and a history of doing work similar to what the $4 million program might be? to me, the easiest way is to have a unambiguous, like a lottery, to gain ranking. Then there is no collusion, there is nobody reviewing a book. You've already passed the sniff test and you've got pass go. Now everybody's number is randomly taken out, and that, if you're first one, then you're number one. Because the intent is you're gonna go through the list. The board, now we would bring that list to the board to approve the ranking, and it just means whoever was picked first is the first to get the first job or deny the first job. And then you go to the second and the third.
Well, the issue I think I have with that is that like, on the design services, okay, there's 4 or 5 firms, that's fine, everyone may get a job at the end of the year, but when you do contractors, you may get 20 submittals. Say 16 are okay, but the one that had the best book might not get a job. Well, and the one that got the worst book could get the best job.
But theoretically, you could also get harmed by somebody being a reviewer of your book that maybe has had a relationship that didn't like your responses or time, and all of a sudden you get a bad score. And other people get ahead of you. So in the double blind thing that I'm talking about, if everybody passes the financial and the job history and qualify for the job, they're all put in a bowl and everybody has an equal opportunity as to whether they're picked 1 or 5 or 7. It takes out the human factor. If you leave the ranking to people in procurement, who knows how that ranking
So the
is turn
scoring
out?
is either a pass or a fail.
That's the way I see it. We're opening it up for the community, for everybody that meets the financial criteria, the job experience criteria, and to a certain extent, the local criteria, to all get in there. Yeah, there may be 20 people in that fishbowl, and we're gonna rank all 20. Now, assumably,
Pass, fail.
So, but then if you only have 16 jobs, the four might be set out.
that's a potential, that's the luck of the draw. I just think if you're gonna rely on procurement to score your books only, I think there's too much chance of human error. It's what do you call it, when you use your own, subjective.
But right now, procurement's not scoring those books, they're bringing them in a committee from different departments.
No, they're scoring those books. Yeah, the committee comes from different departments.
So what would change?
To me, they may have that committee meet one time to score the books.
Yes, and then you're done.
And if you wanna keep the scoring process with that, just for the books, I'm okay with that.
I would say in the continuing contract basis, you score the books, phase 1 is the scoring of the books, and then it goes 1 through 10, because number 1 probably has the most experience, the second has the next experience, the third, and number 9 or number 10 has no experience. So if you do a lottery, number 10 with no experience just went to number 1, by chance.
But how they pass the book? If they met the criteria in the
But
book,
they're
they
not-
should be allowed to do the job.
Correct, they would be number 10 in the process.
Right, but it's no different in a sales organization where if we're all salespeople, you can't all go meet the same person at the front door. You gotta follow an up wheel. If you're first on Monday, you're last the next day. And it just keeps,
See,
it works.
human nature is people that know companies that had a good experience are typically gonna score those books positively because they have knowledge of that company. People that, on the opposite end, that have dealt with somebody that maybe it's a problem and they've had issues in the end, human nature says they're gonna probably give them a slightly smaller score. So I'm just trying to create a pool of work, $4 million and under, for whatever our yearly budget is, to give everybody the chance, if you pass financially or not, you're in the lottery. And depending on how you pull out of the lottery determines your ranking that goes to the board. Now, hopefully we have a lot of work and you can work your way through that list. But you are correct, that may not be the case. There may be 5 companies that did that, that don't get anyone. On the other hand, you could get a company, and if all the people have experience with them and like that staff and know they'll do a good job, then you're gonna have the same companies that always shine, gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then those same people that are always 7, 8, 9, and 10 are gonna complain again because there were only 5 jobs that got out, and again, they spent the money on a book, they submitted it, and they got nothing. I think the intent was people complaining that didn't have a high-power market person for the presentation and things of that nature.
We took the presentation out of it.
Well, right, so now you're trying to make it fair across the board. I mean, if you guys still want to, it's your call. If you want to make a recommendation to
It
still.
kind of boils down to like, does past performance actually count in the books? And I'd always argue it from procurement from day one. I wish it counted more. I mean, it doesn't, I mean, you can do a job, do a horrible job at it, but because you said you did it, it's experience, it's done, you scored just right up with somebody else. Doesn't matter if whether or not you did a good job or a bad job.
I would agree, so here's what I would suggest, just being a liaison. You got two options in here. One is the blind lottery,
Right.
scoring of the book. If you qualify, you're in the lottery. And then however the lottery pulls out is how the board ranks. Or two, score the books with that same committee, and whatever the score point totals are, determine your ranking going to the board. So I would suggest that you guys make a motion to go one way or the other in terms of the recommendation.
Well, for a vote, anyway, yeah.
We can make it rank.
What's that?
I go by the rank. I go with number 2 on the rankings. And then take out the presentation part for continuing contracts, not for specific projects.
Correct. I can't do that with RFQs, that,
Yeah.
contract.
I agree with the ranking.
Yeah, I would too. It's.
There you
So
go.
we need a motion then. So you had started a motion, you need to complete it. So that we can
So
vote on it.
I would make a motion on the table to bring forth to the board, the continuing contracts for all professionals, to be ranked with the first phase, which is the book phase. And from there, that would be the ranking for the selection of
The ranking of the vendors to go to the board for ratification.
eliminating the presentation part.
Now, the one question I have is, haven't we already done the ranking for this go around right
Yeah,
now?
it's not for the next, that's for the next go round, the next.
Yeah, this is for 3 years from now.
Oh, okay, okay, all right, fair enough.
So I have one question of clarification also. So when we talk about these continuing services, we know the architects, we know the engineers, we know the general contractors. But do you have, is that the extent of the continuing services? Do you go beyond that?
We have
Building officials.
building officials, engineers, civil engineers, projects 200,000 and lower, general contractors, and then projects 200,000 to 4 million, general contractors.
So you have two different categories.
Okay.
And yes, mechanical, electrical engineers.
Right, so I guess where I'm getting at is, you don't have a continuing services for roofing companies or for a specific trade?
Roofing consultants. But typically, the roofing consultant contract, most of those guys are architects anyhow.
These are all professional services.
Okay, so that falls under one of our categories.
Yeah, not the
Okay.
actual roofing, but.
But we have a roofing consultant, so let's say on this job, in this particular, I have a vendor here that is the roofing consultant, not acting as an architect, but is a continuing
That's
contractor.
a professional, that's still a professional.
So typically roofing, if it's strictly just a roofing job, then yeah, we'd use a roofing consultant. If it's more than that, it requires design, mechanical, electrical, under an architectural umbrella, then we'd use the architect.
So it's all the professionals,
Yeah.
including,
Construction management.
construction management and,
Building officials and.
your category is, Jack?
Yeah, building.
Building official, thank you. Okay.
So we have a motion from ours, is that, well, after the clarifications, is that seconded?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Hume, all in favor? Any opposed?
And then the second motion, possibly if you would make, would be in terms of the professional firms, architects, mechanical, civil, PEs, providing schematic type services and cost estimating services, and not preventing those firms from then competing in the RFQ should that job ever go out, assuming that all the information from that schematic or conceptual project is fairly distributed to all of the RFQ vendors prior to the RFQ.
Absolutely.
That would be any professional services.
Correct.
Meaning, I mean, just because you don't typically reach out to, you could reach out to a building official and he can give you his input on the project prior to it going out.
Correct. Yes, it's designed to, if I come to you, let's say you were a CM, and I said, look, could you estimate how much this chiller replacement might be, or a shed, a playroom? And you provide me a rough schematic concept of what it might look like and a cost estimate. Then in 2 years or whatever, if we do an RFQ for that, technically right now procurement will not allow, because you consider to have an unfair advantage, and you can't participate if that becomes an RFQ. So the intent is to engage you guys. The board had always asked us, well, could we do this at this campus? Well, we have to go out and get some schematic design, sell it to the board, sell it to the community, and then get with the finance people, and if we have a budget for it, then we can go out and do an RFQ. But if that person provided that information as of today, then they can't participate in that RFQ, an unfair advantage.
Right.
And I'm not saying a full set of drawings, I'm saying schematic, conceptual type things.
Whatever information.
Yeah, look up the setbacks,
Is collected
how much
on,
square footage we
Because
get, that type of thing.
we have many jobs that the board asks us certain projects and certain questions, and I don't have the architectural services, because I don't have an architect in-house. I don't have a cost estimating firm here, an engineering firm. So I go to people and I ask them, would you be willing to do this? Well, if this potentially could be a $20 million job, well, I'm happy to do it for you, but I don't want to lose out on being able to
Right.
be in the race to win the bigger piece of the pie.
I think I was just clarifying that it's all professional services
Yes.
that could be part of this,
Equal.
not just spelling out.
Agree?
I have one hesitation with this, from the standpoint that we're all in the business of relationships. Yes, I sell architectural services, but it's all about relationships with our company. So if you're doing a study and you're working directly with staff at, say, a school, you're building a relationship with them. If you're not, you're stupid, but you're there to build a relationship with them. So if you actually apply for the job that may come later on, you're one step ahead of your competition. You have already started working with a relationship. And if you haven't blown that relationship, that helps you in your presentation.
To a certain extent, yes.
So you
Now,
just
should
should
your participation with that client be limited? And what I mean by that, let's take, for example, Lehigh Senior High School. Bob, that was you guys, right? Is it fair to, when we're deciding on a particular job, that you meet with the principal and get a rough idea, maybe one meeting? I think that's reasonable. Remember, everything we're talking about here is schematic. Is it possible? What might it look like? And what do you think the rough cost estimate is? So that we can bring it to the board and say, here's what we're seeing. We think we have the budget, there is a need, and the board then says, we'd like to see you go forward with this. Then, of course, we try to put an advertisement out, get the funding, and go out. If you step past that line, and maybe that's a determination I made, that how much information, but regardless, at the end of the day, any documents, schematics, sketches, narratives, everything you do should be documented. Should be equally shared fairly, that entire report. Now, I agree with you, you may have met that principal may have really liked you, and if that principal sits in on the scoring committee, there could be a slight favoritism, but that's up to me to let them know this is a brand new game here. You may have had some interaction, but remember, this is schematic and conceptual only. So.
Well, I agree with you, everything you said, if you only had one meeting with those individuals, but sometimes, as you know, a more complicated study will require more meetings.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. You recently were involved with the Bonita Springs roof collapse structural investigation. You had some meetings with me and a little bit with the principal, but then you went and you did your job, you did the evaluation.
Right.
So now if I tell you next 2 months from now, I'm gonna do a $7 million RFQ to rip all that lumber out and everything and do that, wouldn't you want to be able to participate? You provided a structural analysis. You didn't have a whole lot of in-depth information with the principal. You were asked to analyze the building, what might it take? Now, all of your reporting and photos should be distributed to everybody in the RFQ, but wouldn't you like a shot at doing that building?
Right, and my counterpoint would be, if I met the principal, I don't remember who he was.
No, but Bob, everything is subjective.
I think that there has to be, because he does have a valid point, and it's a reality. If somebody from the outside is looking at it, they're gonna think exactly what he's saying. So I think that maybe you just add a step on before the RFQ or when they sign the schematic, something that says that the county has no obligation and that they understand that. And then the people that are also the RFP, that they understand, I don't know, something that you can cover your liability, and then at the same time, the person who did the schematics.
That the process could be done the way you say it. The only thing is you have to control it. It has to be public documents, pictures, photos, reports, all that has to be made public. And the person that you hire to do a report has to be limited to you, your department, and maybe a principal or one person, and that is it. And you explain to the school staff that this person might not be in that final process, but you're not to,
Well,
this is.
how about we take it a step further? Anyone that is involved with these design professionals, creating the schematic and the concepts, will be not allowed to be on the scoring committee during the RFQ
That's
process.
fine too.
That could be done that way too.
That way, that way, there isn't any interference there.
That removes that person.
Then what about so on any paperwork that's provided, is there any title blocks where it tells you which company was involved?
We can ask for it to be blind. We can have their reports put on district letterhead.
Well, you still need to identify the person that did the report. If they have to sign a report, if they have to stand by their report.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can't blindly say that. Now, the thing is, how to limit that is the person that's going there or the company that's going to that school is limited to your contact and maybe one person.
And remember, I'm not a scorer.
No,
So
you're not, but you're.
automatically, I can be,
That liaison.
the principal has vice principals that they can assign, or teachers from the school, or building supervisor they could assign. If you meet like planning,
Bob had contact with the principal, he doesn't remember the principal, so that's really all and then if the principal, if he did, he would be removed, there would be somebody else at the school say, okay, they might remember his company at the end of the day.
but I gotta look at for the benefit of the school district.
Correct.
I need these professionals to provide schematic and conceptual drawings so I can function and work for the board. Right now, I have nothing.
All you need to do for how the liability of the county looks is some kind of process to release your liability that you're favoring somebody. So whether you make the person with the schematic and the principal who needs sign a waiver or something, or you take a person away from the scoring, that is enough to clear your liability as a favoritism or trying to make money, whatever.
Okay, so I like that idea. We'll move that forward possibly with the concept that whoever is involved in the schematic and conceptual discussions will not participate in the scoring.
I think that's fair.
Okay. Well, you guys need to, I'm not a voting guy.
So, make a motion to move forward with any firm that provides schematic drawings,
Studies,
studies, is not eliminated from the RFQ process, and any district staff that is part of the schematic drawings and studies cannot be part of the RFQ grading.
Selection committee.
Selection committee.
So that was by Jack McStravick, the motion.
Okay, thank you.
Second? Okay. Second by Rob Taylor.
Oh, thank you.
Favor?
Aye.
All right, so those are basically your two board briefing recommendations. So Ryan, if you want to write something up, and Julie and I will get it on the next available briefing possibly.
You need Ryan to be at that board briefing to brief them, or are you gonna brief?
Ms. Morgan, we want you
to submit for a proposal.
Ms. Morgan. Ms. Morgan, Ms. Morgan,
That's true.
Ms. Morgan stated
I'm
she.
sorry. I've been able to hear very little of this conversation, except, you, Ryan, and Scott. So, thank you. I gather that you've reached some conclusions and are ready to move forward. Thank you, I appreciate that. And,
Just to fill you in a little bit, what we essentially amended it to be is, yes, that, the design professionals will not be excluded from doing stuff, from the main project after doing study. The caveat being that any contact with the school in question or any district staff regarding that study, that district staff is not on the selection committee when it does go to RFQ. So if you have a study and you go out there and you have 2 or 3 meetings, you get real close with the school principal, they're not gonna be part of that scoring committee. They would delegate a vice principal or somebody else to be on that scoring committee if they were asked.
that makes perfect sense. Okay.
All right, so we've got 2 recommendations coming forward, that being one of them. And the other one would be your recommendation of getting rid of, on the continuing contracts, all continuing contracts, getting rid of the presentation and utilizing the book scoring by the committee to provide the ranking that goes to the board. And that'll occur in 3 years from now, because we just finished up the ones for this.
Yeah, I know.
And correct, and if your concern is true, and that, you know, we don't wanna let procurement decide the whole thing, we can look up the recommendation, the makeup of that committee to make sure that it is well represented all the way around.
Well, I think what I've seen is, nobody can state, other than in standard procurement process, the term unfair advantage. That's what they're holding their hat on. And when the work that Debbie Kirchen did, the spreadsheet and the questions she asked seemed to indicate predominantly that most of them said, no, if it was just a study, you know, we don't see there would be any conflict in an RFQ, especially if you had every intention of issuing it to all the RFQ participants in advance. So I think other counties are doing that. So what this is trying to do is get the support of our vendors, you guys, to be able to help us guide both the departments and the board and the super. If there's a potential project that someone would like to see move forward, you know, similar to like the pre-K program. Well, can we go out and see what it might look like on that site? What might be the cost impact? Then we can go and brief the board, workshops, things of that nature, and if they think, you know, the dollar value is right and the concept looks right, they can say move forward. And then we look to funding from finance, and then we put out an RFQ. So it just helps us get the board better information, simply because
Absolutely.
I don't have an architect in-house. I don't have a professional cost estimator in-house. The school district couldn't afford to pay it, trust me.
Scott, I think one of the keys though is that when you have these studies done and you send out an RFQ and you make that study a part of the RFQ, it evens the playing field for everybody and it gives them the information that you guys have already gathered. So now they can do their presentations more geared towards what you guys are looking for.
That is correct.
And they have the background to back that up.
And that is correct.
So that should be a given, that on any RFQ, hopefully you guys, currently, if you have an RFQ and you've got some background on it, that you share that information with whoever signs up. I don't know if that's true or not.
No, you are correct, and everything we said makes perfect sense to the common person. All right? Unfortunately, common sense doesn't always prevail, and human nature is, if people think that they could get questioned, or an RFQ could be contested because someone had an RFQ, 9 times out of 10, those people that make those decisions will always take the easy way out. I mean, look, if we approve this and the board directs us and says they agree and we move forward, worst case scenario is we put an RFQ out and then maybe somebody contests it. Well, then we may have to relook at this process.
Exactly.
But I would venture to say that most of you are the ones who are involved in these programs anyhow. And you would love to buy the chance to make a couple $1,000s on a survey or a concept and then still be able to get the big piece of the pie.
Right. Agreed.
All right, so if we could, I think we have, I'm sorry?
She needs to go.
Oh, Ms. Morgan, you have to go?
No, I don't. I will listen.
Next meeting's the last
but
meeting.
I'm just listening. So I'm sorry that I considered my request just to your meeting.
Oh, no problem at all. It actually gave us some time for the agenda, because I think we were a little short otherwise.
All right, now I gotta come up with a new topic.
I do have one last kind of housekeeping item that came out from the committee chair. There's been a legal recommendation, and we kind of went through this briefly with the finding the quorum for today, that the virtual meetings are no longer an option. The governor has not extended the executive order to do virtual meetings. It doesn't appear to be a very big deal with us. Most of us wanted to come back, but there are other committees that went from having 30 members to having 120 members, just because it was virtual and it was easy for everybody. And now they're like, no, like, this was a good thing, and they wanted to continue it, and that does not appear to be a viable option at this time, so. We have to have a physical quorum in-house. We can still have a virtual option for people not being here, but it will not count as it would still count as an absence if they're not here and they don't have and you can't get quorum because of them, they're still absent even though they could be here virtually. Which is what it comes down to, which is really kind of strange. But a lot of the other committees wanted to keep their meetings virtual, and there's a lot of pushback on that. It doesn't really seem to apply to us all that much, but it's just kind of, just as an FYI for the folks in general. And then, you know, we made our motion. Do we need to finalize what our recommendation about the videotaping of the meetings?
I thought it was in the meeting minutes last time that we.
It was actually a motion made and approved.
Yeah, there was the last meeting.
Mr. Hume, Mr. Vogt, videotaping the meetings, Mr. Taylor seconding, carried 10-1, or 10-0.
Okay, but would you want that also to show up in that board briefing?
I don't need, no, the board briefing is just your recommendations for changes in the procurement process. The videotaping was, I don't think you need to bring that up. It was basically a choice that they were asking. And we took the easy choice, which is just continue to do it, so.
Fair enough. Well, we really didn't have a whole lot of agenda, and we do need to, you know, dig up some subjects for the upcoming months. Is there something that we could help the district look into in the future? I know there's some, you know, construction updates or anything like that.
I can give you a quick construction update. The district, as of the 26th, took substantial completion for Gateway High School. The furniture's been loaded in. I believe today's the last day of the furniture people being there. So that building is up and running. We're still waiting for the approval of the DO. We have one flashing light out on the street we have to install, and then our engineer can apply to get that approved. I believe tentatively, don't quote me on the date, but I think they're trying to shoot for a May 19th ribbon cutting ceremony out at the school, so I'm sure there'll be invitations potentially coming out about that. We are on schedule, actually ahead of schedule, for MM Middle School, which is the new Lambs School out in Lehigh. Their contract substantial completion date was July 15th, their schedule shows May 15th. So we'll see as we get closer to that date to see how that comes into play. So that's on target, that's moving forward. We completed the James Stevens pre-K, that opened up right first of the year, so they're utilizing that facility. Right now we have a whole bunch of contracts sitting in legal, waiting for contract negotiations, so I can bring it to the board for total project costs. As for Riverdale High School, G. Weaver Hips, I have to go to the board with a total project cost for the LEPAC roof here, but that's being bid out and we actually opened the bids. FMTC, we've already negotiated with contracts, except for the building official. We have just some things, some business things we have to clear there. And I'll be bringing that to the board. So right now procurement has a whole bunch of contracts and negotiations that are going on that eventually I have to bring every one of them to the board. But right now it's kind of in our legal department, which is pretty much got inundated with all these projects we got coming out. So I continually go down there every day, try to push paperwork through the horn. I was successful with some work for Mr. Dana here today. So
You gotta have some patience with procurement, because remember, they did do 120 RFQs in the last 4 months.
That is correct. They've done a pretty bang-up job. The difference is now we have more eyes involved and more people to review. So what might have been only 2 or 3 people putting their hands on something now I've got about 10. So it's a process, and I know it's a struggle, but we're getting through it. And hopefully we'll get a lot of these other jobs kicked off and moving forward with contracts to all the vendors shortly.
Good. One other the subject we've kind of seen in the paper, the innovation school has been talked about. Is there any position for help on this committee? Anything that we can do to?
What I would think is once we start getting into the design and schematic, I'd like to have that committee, because they do have a person at the district that is headlining that for them, come in and give you guys an idea of, one, where it potentially is going to go. Number 2, what the concept is, maybe ask the FGCU people that are involved as well to come in and give you a presentation of what they're talking about doing it conceptually at that school.
You mean to do that before or after RFQ and the project's been awarded?
Probably, let's see what kind of information they turn up. There isn't enough information that they have right now that I think I could have them come in to brief you guys. But I think as they start getting some information, I can certainly set up a presentation for all of you. The other thing we got going on is our roofing jobs, Norfolk Myers High School and Cypress Lake, both about done. We completed and got substantial completion on Norfolk Myers High School. That's wrapped up. And I think we're about a month away, I wanna say April 5th or something like that for Cypress Lake. The jobs are going ahead. They're on budget, on schedule. I know there's some issues with a vendor out there that, has been in the news in terms of the roofing, but that is not my prime contractor. Our prime contractor on those roofs is Target Builders. So we're on schedule, we're on budget, the jobs are getting done, so I don't see any impact from that other subcontractor issue that's been out in the media.
So what can we do to help you guys in the future as you move forward in looking at properties to purchase for potential schools? Can we help?
Well, now with the changes in planning, we've had some attrition in planning. So yeah, I think having them, if they're looking at properties for potential school sites, to bring in these plans and these concepts for this committee to review precursory, to give some insight and some updates before it goes to the board or to the DAC committee, would be very helpful. Because right now, our planning department, that's gonna be the weakest link until they can find, knowledgeable replacements to fill those positions.
I just think that would be a natural fit for this committee.
Absolutely.
And helping the school district, whether you have a full
Planning staff or not,
getting a second opinion on property.
I also would like to utilize you guys. Right now, we have a weak link in terms of ILAs, interlocal agreements. Some are being drafted up. You folks have all had some kind of relationship with interlocal agreements with the county and Cape Coral and so on and so forth, Lehigh Acres. Maybe we bring those people in to start discussing the criticality of the ILAs and what they're thinking, and then your thoughts. You guys all know how I get beat up with the ILA. My hands are tied on every job I do. You guys maybe have worked with other counties where you've seen other ILAs and can provide some report and insight into our legal staff as well as our planning staff. ILAs are a big problem. What else? I mean, if you guys want to brainstorm and come up, I would love for you guys to look at our drawings. Right now I got pre-K8 and Astera. We're at 60%. I'd love to bring those drawings in here with the architect and go over what this is gonna look like, because potentially this is gonna be our new pre-K8.
Well, and that was kind of my next question, the one project we never really hear about, NNK, or whatever that has morphed into since it was advertised.
It's quadruple A now, and there is even discussion, and this is strictly discussion, that the Cypress Lake, Castaldi rebuild, it was always going to be our prototype middle school. Now there's been some discussion, potentially, they have not made a decision, let me make that clear, it could be a pre-K8 school. Now, I've looked at it, and I think it's gonna be very difficult to fit that on that site and make it work. But that might even be something that we bring in and have all of you guys look at. Just because you could shoehorn something in, doesn't mean it's gonna work. And Dana, I can tell you, and you guys too have worked with me on some of these traffic issues, trying to get the traffic parent pickup off the streets. So maybe input from this committee might help steer something in a more appropriate way, rather than planning go in a different direction.
I think that's fine. I think that's a good idea. I think if you were to bring your design professionals in and we give them like 10 minutes, another 10 minutes, 20 minutes at the most, we can critique, we can all critique on that project and give you some ideas, of what you can and can't, have you thought about, on the early stage, 50% phase.
we've got to do it earlier than that.
Yeah.
Got to do it after SDs.
Yep, right at 30%, right at
25% phase, yeah.
You
Okay.
got to do it
25 or 30%.
because once you get done with
That's-
SDs, you're
So would it be your request that I get
Absolutely.
the architect and come in for the next meeting with Harvard Jolly
Absolutely.
to go over the drawings currently for pre-K8 and Astera? We could certainly do that.
Any projects you have, we can critique them, because that's what we do. We're all in the same business.
Can you tell me, you said something about the interlocal agreement, the county, the relationships. From a legal perspective, what is the challenges that you're looking
Well,
to tackle, how would help? I mean, we have relationships with the local, of course.
it's all comes down to the almighty dollar. And state statute looks at the school district as an entity.
Right.
However, state statute also says, and we have some real good power. Basically, I should be able to build a school and all of the water, sewer, utilities, roadway work, sidewalk works, light, traffic signals, by statute, should be provided by the local entity, meaning the county or Cape Coral or Lehigh Acres. But it says also in the statute that school districts shall work with their local entities, come up with interlocal agreements. So we enter into these interlocal agreements because statute says we should. And we've had a lot of our rights stripped away. So right now, the interlocal agreement, I'm building the road in front of MM Middle. I'm putting the traffic light in front of pre-K 8 in Estera. Gateway High School, I did that traffic circle out in front and all the sidewalk work and utilities, because the interlocal doesn't force the county to be responsible for that.
And the interlocal is an agreement between the school district and the municipality, so they both have to agree on the terms.
Correct.
If we're gonna change it, they both have to agree.
Right, and they're in perpetuity, and the problem is we engaged with a very weak hand when we agreed to that interlocal.
A long time ago.
And interlocal supersedes the school district rights by statute. Once that interlocal is agreed to and signed, it's in perpetuity until both entities agree to change it.
So they're actually, you're asking, we can lobby, is that what you're asking us?
Well, right now, Ms. Morgan has lobbied and talked to some people in regards to that, it needs to be done. Well, you're talking a lot of money. In some instances, like Benita, the off-site work was $700,000, $750, I think.
But what I'm saying is that you have entities that do business with the interlocal every day. So legal has to find a way to say, okay, how many ways we're gonna attack this interlocal to funnel that they have to sit down on the table again. I mean, it has to be kind of like a strategy project.
Here, I got an idea here. Ryan and I sit on the Horizon Council for Lee County. Those are all business leaders and they're government leaders. I believe the school district has a representative there, a board member. It's not Ms. Morgan, it's not another person.
Jordan, I believe.
Ms. Jordan. So if we can get, and we can talk to Ms. Morgan there and try to get a 15-minute presentation from the school district as to what your plans are for the next 5 years to present to this group. And point to them that, you know, one of our issues is interlocal agreements. You're in that room with everybody that does interlocals, that makes agreements with it, interlocals. So maybe that's the way to do it, approach it there, is give them a general view and then, you know.
Well, I think you need typically interlocal agreements with the planning department. That's their expertise. So our planning department needs to be there, as well as being supported by our legal department. And they need to sell this. I mean.
But when you say sell, you have, I don't know, $500 million worth the next 5 years. And you know that you're going to, if each school you spend $200,000 because the interlocals don't help. You can make an argument that you have over $1 million and you bring in more residents, blah, 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 this pitch of the salespeople. And then to the right forum to gain some attention and somehow get the support from the people that actually can put a little bit of pressure to these interlocal agreements because they're gonna be the bad guys. Somehow, it has to be a strategy to get it done. Otherwise, you're still gonna be paying for whatever you're paying until now.
Well, it's kind of a vicious circle.
Yeah.
We have a similar issue when we build shelters. We look for the county to share in the cost of shelters. Now, ironically, when we went to the county to have that discussion, 2 days before in the news press, the county said, well, maybe we're not gonna pay the 50% burden for sheriffs in every school. So there's always gonna be a tit for tat, so hopefully there can be a middle ground. I'm never gonna get everything. But we can certainly get something that is more equitable and fair to both entities.
Right. And right now, we're not there at all. We're paying the full burden off-site for everything.
But this has to be something about procurement and planning. It has to be management view to make sure that something gets dropped.
No, and how, you can't make them, approve anything, and at the end of the day, it's like, we're asking them to pick up more of the bill, what are we offering?
Well,
Correct.
sadly, that's what impact fees are for. As you develop, and every builder builds a house, there's a certain amount of impact fees they've gotta pay. That's supposed to support infrastructure.
Understood.
So that money is being collected. Now, if we're doing our due diligence and informing them of our future development years in advance so that they can plan, that should be what the impact fees are utilized for. Their growth needs to be supported by school seats. Hence, we get our money and build schools and all that infrastructure to get to that brand new school to support those kids moving into homes should be by those local entities. And right now, it's not.
Well, but can you honestly say that in the past, that forward thinking of planning ahead and communicating with the county has happened?
Yes, but no. Yes, we submit to the county every year a board-approved 5-year plan.
Okay.
Someone in the county gets that school board-approved 5-year plan, and that plan can change every year, sometimes a couple times in a year. But every year, based on the board's approval of that 5-year plan, it's submitted to the county so that they're aware of the growth. Our previous planning person used to work directly with the county. They look at how many kids, when the house gets sold, the county people are communicating with a person in our planning department, okay, this house is sold, there's 2.5 kids per family, and so on, and they start calculating that for the scatter grant. So there is communication, but the communication has to be delivered all the way to the people that make the financial decisions for budgeting for their 5-year plans. If that isn't being broadcast, in my opinion, clearly and loudly and publicly, then it falls on deaf ears and nobody's doing anything. It just becomes another piece of paper that every year goes into somebody's inbox and they file in the Lee County Schools file.
Yep.
So I had suggested that planning 4 times a year, meet with the county, hire county officials that can make decisions, because there's many people even at my level, and I'm restricted in certain terms as to what I can do. Get to the higher level people 4 times a year and talk about the school builds, talk about the potential of shelters, talk about the off-site work to start. So 4 times a year, you're constantly updating, and hopefully they're going to their superiors to make sure that, hey, we really need to think about the funding to work with the school district for school X that we want to be a shelter because it's on the other side of 75. And then there's no excuse. But right now, it's hide and seek, and they got the winning hand in the poker game.
You got a lot of turnover in your planning department, that's why.
Well,
Well, I see that Balti will have to put some pressure to build some schools that are, going that way. What are they doing?
The awareness has to be set, you have to make it aware that there's an issue on a higher level, and then bring it down to where you need to fix the problem.
We keep talking to people that can't really make the decisions,
Correct.
the higher levels may not even really know there's a problem.
Right.
well, I think
I'm telling you, Balti can have to do something. I live in Estero. There's no school, to drive to Pinewood, that's about the only elementary school, York is full. They keep building that way across the east, across the, where are they going to go to school?
my personal opinion is just because of the way public machines work that I see. I came from the private sector, so this has been enlightening the last 15 years with the district. I think the only way you're gonna see change in this is if our school board members meet with the county commissioners. The school board members are the bosses ultimately of all of us school employees. And the commissioners are the bosses of all the city manager and the assistant city managers and the people that have fiduciary responsibility for that. They need to come up with a fair and equitable discussion and pass that directive down to staff to come up and create these documents that are fair and equitable with the vote. If we try to climb from the bottom up, you're gonna hit a brick wall. It needs to
We
come,
already have.
in my opinion, from the top down.
I second that motion.
Yeah,
All in favor?
side pressure always helps.
And, I can give you some examples. Gateway High School, $1.6 million for a shelter. And then middle school, $1.3 million for shelter upgrades.
You didn't get that money from the county?
We're not there yet, But I'm just saying, that's what the school district has expended to meet the county's emergency management needs. Now, statute says we shall work in a deficit county. The school districts and colleges, state colleges, have to work with the local entities to provide those shelter seats if you're in a deficit county. So I'm just giving you some numbers. 1.6 for Gateway High School. 1.3 for MM or the new Lambs out, that's a shelter as well. Traffic improvements offsite, Benita Springs High School, $750,000. Traffic improvements at Gateway High School, the Circle, probably another 600,000 plus or minus. Roadways, because it's a private road at this point in time, but even the infrastructure and turn lanes that I was required to do on adjacent streets, $250,000 plus or minus.
Yeah.
So this is money that's coming out of classrooms. It's COPS funding, it's school-based funding, it's ISOC funding that maybe could have been repurposed and created a school-centric program for kids that we're building roads and we're putting in plumbing and sewer and things of that nature. So I hope we get reimbursed at least 50% on the dollar for the shelters. I'll never get reimbursed for the off-site traffic improvements, I don't think that. But we're spending an awful lot of money, and when you add all that money up, you say, well, gee, that could put an addition building on a school somewhere which has the needs. Maybe get rid of portables.
Now, on Benita, we were able to trade some land that the county wanted in exchange for the funds for the signal in front of Benita.
That is correct, but again,
That was a struggle.
it was scrub property to us, but nonetheless, we weren't gonna get that light unless we did this. And they wanted that property, so it was a benefit to them because they had a long-term vision of a park, playfield. So to them, it was a benefit, and that's the only reason they came to the table, otherwise it never would have ponied up.
Yeah.
Maybe next year, bring something to the table for every project.
Well, I think the fact that
There's a 30 pen, and that one thing is like a checkbook.
well, when you look at what we've done for them as a good partner, and we've moved forward. 30,000 deficit, last time I checked, 30,000 deficit shelter seats in Lee County. And we've moved forward and we're providing seats in our buildings. We try to do as school we can where the flood zone is appropriate. So we're meeting our due diligence as a community member, because remember, it's about the taxpayers, regardless of who's. So at some point in time, it'd be nice to have a partner that commits. So that's where the ILAs kick in and provide that guaranteed partnership.
Go ahead.
I think you're the only entity that's built emergency shelter facilities in Lee County. I don't think Lee County's done.
You got a shelter at FGCU, I believe, their gym is a shelter.
Alico Arena.
Alico Arena, I'm not
That
sure.
was, Alico Arena was 25 years ago.
Yeah,
when they built that.
they're helping pay for the upgrades. They've also done, some of the libraries can be utilized as emergency shelters also.
But for the most part,
But
it's a school
not nearly the size.
No,
Yeah.
the only one I'm aware of, whether they participated was when FSW built their gym, whether that's a shelter or not, that I'm not sure of.
It may be in a flood zone, I'm not.
No, it's not, and I don't ever remember any discussion about it.
Now, by state statute, they're supposed to, if you're a deficit, you're obligated to work. Now,
It very well could be, I just don't know the answer to that.
So at some point, somebody has to say, hey, we're not building any more shelter facilities for you guys until.
Then you're in violation of state statute.
Then the building code requires it unless you're in a certain zones. If you're in a evacuation zones A, B, or C, if you're in those zones, then you don't have to build the shelter standards. But that's prime property, so that property value is so much higher than the other zones that are.
Correct.
that's where the people are.
You gotta build a school.
So, and is Ms. Morgan still on?
I think we lost her.
Okay. So how do we, Scott, I mean, how can we help in getting the school board to go meet with the county commissioners regarding these ILAs?
Well, why don't we do this? The next meeting, I'm gonna bring in the architect to go over pre-K. I think that'll suck up the full house, if you guys agree. how about the next meeting after that, I bring in the attorney and I bring in planning to come in with copies of all the ILA agreements, we'll latch it up.
Couple meetings ago,
Yeah.
Kathy came in and went through all the ILAs.
All right, so we,
But again, like you said though, we're climbing up a hill with those ILAs and, you know,
So why can't we invite a commissioner to come to the meeting?
well, how about we do this? We'll do a recommendation, just like we did on everything else. I will get with Kathy Ebal and have copies of all these ILAs emailed to all of you. Can you make a note of this?
I think we already have them.
Did you get them?
Yeah.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Okay, well, read them, make some comments, and then we can do a recommendation here with recommendations to go to a board briefing and then ultimately an action meeting, requesting that the board move forward with ensuring that they meet with like commensurate commissioners to discuss the revamping of the ILA and to give subordinate staff direction to put it together and make it happen, a fair and equitable deal. I mean, that's your recommendation, to get the board to vote and approve on it, and then they can, if they approve it, then every one of them will be a participant in picking up the phone and
Right.
trying to set up those meetings.
So instead of Cecil calling us on a street light, we can call him on an interlocal agreement, something a little bit more important.
I would say that pinpoint the ones that you want to discuss, like let's tackle two, three projects. And then what is the interlocal agreement expectations, because then it gets lost. But they should come out with saying, okay, I mean, that's kind of like a pressure, I guess, could be.
Well, I agree, that's where I think that, you know, getting together, once the commissioners and the board says, you guys will work together, then staff then work together on the next 5 years or whatever it may be. You know, especially if you know a project is coming down the pipe, you know, what can we do to help each other on this particular site?
Well, right now, I can tell you, in the next 3 years, I've got probably $350 million worth of new school construction. Cypress Lake Middle, Franklin Parks Elementary, pre-K-8 in Estero, Riverdale renovation. But Riverdale's already kind of developed, but I'm talking about all things that potentially have all this off-site cost that could be district borne. So there's a lot of money out there, potentially, a few million anyway, that should be decided.
Yeah.
So I would suggest we look at the interlocals just one last time, and at your next meeting, make a recommendation again to bring to the board, and I can bring it forward in a briefing, and then into that, we could talk about dollars with them, we could talk about any of your comments of what you see in the ILAs that just is not fair towards the district side, and get the board to listen and possibly vote on a direction. And our recommendation would be that they, as a board, communicate with their commensurate commissioners to direct staffs on both sides to meet, to hammer out a fair and equitable interlocal agreement for both parties.
Yeah, I remember when we looked through them, there was kind of a clear, you know, you could see the progress of, you know, lawyer involvement, I suppose. The original ones with Lee counties are like 7 or 8 pages. The follow-up one with Cape Coral was 9 or 10 pages. The newest one was Bonita Springs. It was like 160 pages. You know, so it's just kind of like, there's gonna be no simple, you know, it's gonna be one of those drawn out telephone books of an agreements by the time it's all said and done, I'm afraid.
I mean, they have a lot in the agreements, storm debris storage, shared use of properties for storm debris storage, shelters, shared use facilities. But ours is pretty simple. Here's our property line. Bring everything to us. We don't want to pay a dime for everything off the top. It's pretty simple. We're gonna build a school. We're gonna house all the children that you're allowing development to occur. You have to provide that infrastructure, which is spelled out in statute.
Do they know how much what does that mean for them?
I think we've had meetings, specifically a lot of meetings with them at middle school. They know exactly what it is, but I'll give you part of, we had to make an agreement that if we ever go above what we had planned to design at MM, they want us to go all the way out to Homestead Road. That's a mile away from the school, and make turn lanes, acquire land and make turn lanes. Now, there were turn lanes on Homestead for every one of those little side streets, Sunrise Boulevard. When they increased that road, they took those turn lanes and made it another active lane, essentially wiping out the turn lanes. So now they know as that Sunrise Boulevard, we're there, and all those developments start happening, because I'm already hearing rumors, they want somebody to pay for the Homestead Road improvements, and right now, I'm the only fish on the street. So in their development order, they put language in there that potentially, if I ever had a need to really expand that school, I've got to pay the costs of fixing that intersection, a mile away. Now,
Which would be the only
wouldn't
turn lane on Homestead.
well, wouldn't prudence say it would be?
You don't need turn lane on a multi-lane, especially.
Well, and that's what we tried to explain to them. We're using your theory and why we don't need to put a turn lane there.
And they said,
No, we don't agree.
They hold us hostage.
They don't have one run of veterans, do they?
No.
There are no turn lanes on Homestead, right turn lanes.
There used to be.
yeah, when it was too
Have you
late.
seen some of the festivals?
Oh, I grew up in Lehigh, I'm from Lehigh.
So
I know exactly how
So to me,
Yeah.
what upset me, not that it matters, but what upset me is you did this major roadway improvement, millions of dollars. You know that all these parcels, which to some point started to be developed and then stopped. There'll be a lot of houses out there. But you would think that that road and all those intersections with known future development property, major development, that the infrastructure and everything would be forecast in place to support if that was 100% totally built out. And because they didn't, they're forcing the next fish in the pond, which just happened to be me, putting up a new middle school, to bear the burden of that design problem that was not foreseen and developed when they did the roadway improvement. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. And I have to get a school, I have to get seats for kids, so I'm held hostage. We have to agree to these things or I don't get a development order approved.
And that's exactly what you mean.
And you have to maintain that road until you build them a bridge.
Well, unfortunately, we got out of the bridge thing. I'm not a bridge builder.
I'm really looking.
However, I will guarantee you, if some other company starts developing one of those parcels, they're gonna be a bridge builder. Guaranteed. Would you not?
And a turn lane builder,
Yep.
or a signal.
Call me up. I'll put it on.
There you go.
Well, he would be putting a signal in.
But
All right, so I think we have a little bit of work cut out for us.
yes, sir.
Several months ago, we tabled an agenda to kind of wrap up the RFQ process. That hasn't been finalized yet. We need to circle back to that.
Fair enough. We did, we pushed it off to the back, and then that was kind of what we intensively put in for this agenda here today, before we got sidetracked to some degree. Making formal recommendations, if anyone wants to outline what exactly they would like to see addressed in the RFQ process, and kind of send it out, to anybody, probably Julia first, before the meeting would be ideal, so that we could take a look at it. If anyone does want to formalize any requests or clarifications, we could vote on it as a committee about whether or not we make that recommendation to the board.
My recommendation to you guys, write down your question, what you'd like to see changed, and don't put a problem out without what you think is a solution. And nothing is a bad idea. So if you have heartburn with some procurement process now, then go ahead and write down what your complaint is and provide what you feel is a possible alternative to put in that policy place. And then email that to Julia. Julia can combine all that, and then you guys can put it all together and determine what you want to bring forward to the board as a recommendation to the procurement department.
Understood, because all of us internally, we're not gonna agree on all of them anyway, but, we can kind of go through it and go, and, see if we come to, agreement on certain items or not.
Because if you don't congeal this, then nothing's gonna move forward and nothing's gonna change. So it's kind of up to you guys as a committee, congeal your ideas, agree upon what you think is appropriate to move forward to the board, and then we can get it on the board agenda, and maybe action can then occur. That doesn't mean procurement may not have issues with it, but at least we're putting a recommendation as a committee forward.
Right. All right. So with that, I think we've run about, 15 minutes past our allotted time or so. Is there anything, we have no members of the public here today, so we're good to the order. Anybody once briefly around the room? Anything else to add? Seeing a lot of head shaking. All right, so can we get a?
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
I'll second it.
Motion made by Mr. Hume, seconded by Mr. Watkins, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much for coming, and we will see you in May.
Good discussion, everybody.
For not having
Why
me.
did we not have that RFQ, like, brainstorm